Hi everyone. Today let's talk about sighting. This is a term in drawing that refers to using a tool, kind of like a pencil or a stick, and you're using this tool to determine the relationships and the proportions between the objects that are being drawn and the actual angles that you see in the objects in themselves. So there's two things that you're trying to capture with this technique. And this technique also involves holding the stick at arm's length, like you see in this image here. And it usually helps if you close one eye, kind of like when we use a viewfinder. So in some drawings, you can see evidence of the artist using sighting as a technique. One way is by seeing these kinds of lines that are kind of left behind. They are reference lines that the artist used to find angles, such as in this gourd, to determine which way it was turned. Also, these kinds of lines define angles in geometric objects like this cube. And I'm noticing also that they reproportioned this sphere. It used to be much larger. It's gotten a little bit smaller. So these are all characteristics of this kind of a technique where you leave behind kind of remnants of the drawing as you work on them. Here are a few more examples. And again, you can see where all of these lines just sort of extend beyond the objects themselves. You don't draw lines that are just the objects, but you just let it kind of flow through the space of the paper. Here's one that I really love, this evidence of where the person thought they saw the edges of this box, but as they used their sighting stick to perfect the angles and to find the right proportions, they discovered that it was actually down here, and you can kind of see how it changed as this artist was working on their drawing. And in this way, you can really see how they've mapped out where the objects go and how it's been refined along the way. I love how in some cases you can see the objects kind of going behind each other. So you tend to kind of draw the full object and then just let these lines kind of fade away into the background as you fill in with value and cover up some of those extraneous lines. Again, here's another evidence of where the person drew the shape in one way and further refined it as they were working. While we're working on these exercises, we're also going to be working on drawing cylinders. And here are some good examples of seeing how a cylinder changes in space. If you look at this one on the right, if you're looking at it directly straight on, the center of the cylinder essentially forms a straight line. And as you go up from there, the mouth of the cylinder gets wider and wider and wider, with it widest at the top point. And notice this nice curve at the top. And it goes in reverse at the bottom, and there's a nice round curve here at the bottom. These 6 images on your left is a series of what I call like these, they look like cups basically. And as you're looking at it straight on, the top of the rim is really just a straight line. You can't even see the opening of this cup. But as you rise up higher in your perspective, you can see a little bit more and a little bit more. And you'll notice how the rings start to become a lot more rounder as you go up until they're almost a full circle when you're looking from so far above the cylinder. So when it comes to getting some help drawing cylinders, I think it really helps to think of how it fits into a square. And then if you were to take that square shape and flatten it out, how does that circular form sit within that square? And this V section in the middle is another example of what we just looked at, where the top of the rim might look completely flat, and as it goes down, it gets rounder and rounder and fuller. And then when it comes to drawing a full cylinder, sometimes it really helps just to imagine or even draw the rectangular form that it might exist within, and then draw the cylinder inside it. And you'll notice how the top of the cylinder will look a little bit more shallow, while the bottom one looks a little bit more full and round. That's if you're looking at the cylinder from above. Another tip that I want you to think about and remember when you're drawing cylinders is if you have a lip and you're looking directly down, say at the bottom, at the top of the bottle, the lip of the bottle, you'll notice that it's equal distance all the way around, as they show you in number 1. But as it flattens down, as you're looking at it from a lower and lower perspective, you'll notice that the top and the bottom of the rim get more narrow while the edges stay the same. Here we go, have again number 3 getting even more narrow, and then number 4, when you're looking at a pretty low perspective, the front and the back of that edge is very narrow, but notice how the sides have stayed exactly the same as when you looked at it from the very top. So a few things to watch out for when you're drawing cylinders is these corners. If you bring these corners to a point, it looks more like a folded edge, almost like a piece of paper with folded hard edges, as opposed to these round edges that give the illusion of an actual cylinder. Again, watch out for that lip being the same distance all the way around. It should become narrower in the back and in the front. I think this one probably should be a little bit more narrow while it stays wider on the sides. And then notice that the edge, the curve of the top edge, should not be the same as the curve on the bottom edge. If you're looking down at a cylinder, the bottom curve should actually be fairly more rounded than the top curve. I think this one might be a little bit exaggerated to make a point, but essentially this should be more shallow and this would actually be more of a rounded shape. So in our next class, we're going to be exploring sighting as a technique. We're going to be drawing some geometric shapes, and we're going to be adding value to it. So we're going to combine these two techniques into one big drawing. But I wanted to point out that sighting is really a good technique even when you're not just drawing geometric shapes. Like, think about how you might want to find the angle of this part of the watering can, or maybe the proportion of the space here in comparison to the rest of the can. If you're looking for the angle of the way this leaf is coming out of the vase. It's also a really useful tool when you're looking at interior spaces. So perpendicular lines are always going to be in the corners because the way our buildings are built, they're always straight up and down. But how do the angles of the corners come into play? And also, how do the angles of the doorways intersect? And then you can use this tool also as a really effective technique for finding shapes before you move into more organic forms as well. So when you're first starting out with figure drawing, it helps to really find the angles that you see and then refine them as you find the softer, organic, more rounded shapes. You can see, especially right here, it's nice to see just these sharp angles that define the way the knuckles of the hand is turned. You'll notice here they've created almost a corner here where the shoulder is, and then a little slash here that just softens that edge. And then you create the nice curve of the shoulder in that way. You've also found the relationship between the hand and the head and the way this angle comes down towards the skirt, the angle of the arm. And I love how this person has found the angle of the hip, and then it goes into the knee, and this is how they were able to refine that shape to find the curve of the hip and also the way the foot is pointing. So this is a really great video created by the Minneapolis College of Art and Design that shows this technique in action. So let's watch this video together.
Artists and designers determine size, shape, and space through three related drawing techniques: sighting, measuring, and mapping. Take a look at this drawing. What do you notice? You'll likely notice the additional lines in the drawing. These extra lines map the space using the items in the still life to establish relationships of size, shape, and space between the objects. Most artists use mapping and sighting lines in their drawings, if not in actuality, certainly perceptually. Claire, a Minneapolis College of Art and Design Fine Arts major, is demonstrating these techniques for us. First, she positions herself 6 to 8 feet away from the still life, arranged so that her drawing board does not interfere with her line of sight. Then, she marks her chair on the floor in order to make certain that she remains in the same position throughout the entire drawing. She has also taped her paper down along all 4 sides. Before beginning, she takes a moment to look closely at the still life, visualizing it on the paper. With preparations complete, Claire begins with the gesture drawing, using fine charcoal that will wipe away easily with the chamois. Gesture drawings are done very quickly and intuitively. This initial drawing takes no more than 1 or 2 minutes. Once the gesture drawing is laid on the paper, the chamois is used to wipe off the drawing. But it has not disappeared. A light drawing is left on the paper. This is called Printmaking, an Italian word meaning correction. This underdrawing will allow Claire to correct her initial impressions of the still life as she cites, measures, and maps. Claire is ready to begin citing, measuring, and mapping. She uses her citing tool to both cite and measure, holding it straight out from her body with elbow fully extended, keeping the citing stick perpendicular to her body. Squinting one eye to flatten what she sees, she places the citing stick across the width of the bottle, marking it with her thumb. Holding this measurement, she moves the stick to a vertical position, checking how many times the measurement fits into the bottle's overall height. She uses this measurement technique to constantly check the accuracy of size throughout her drawing. Once the width and height are established, she begins to map, using the citing stick to discover the relationships between the bottles. While mapping, she uses the citing stick in the same manner as measuring, but lays it on top of angles she sees in the still life. At this point in the drawing, she leaves all of the measurements and mapping marks visible on the paper. She is willing to make changes when she finds inaccuracies, and can wipe away the drawing charcoal as needed. The goal of this drawing strategy is to discover and convey accurate proportions and relationships. She generalizes shapes, not giving us detail, and working general to specific. After the entire still life is mapped, she will define the still life with compressed charcoal or charcoal pencil, exploring the details that distinguish the bottles from one another and articulating areas of intersection. This is done by simply applying more or less pressure on the drawing tool with a sensitive touch known as phasing. To resolve or finish the drawing, she mops up the surface with the kneaded eraser. The essential beauty of these drawings is that the artist shares their process, their decision-making, their problem-solving with us, the viewer. Many of the decisions remain evident on the page as Printmaking. No value or shading is added. So let's take one final look at the drawings and see what we notice. First, it's a line drawing. It has no value or shading. Second, the line investigates the structure of the space and the objects in the space. Third, the mapping investigates relationships of the objects to one another, establishing proportions and space on the page. Fourth, the line is used as an expressive tool to give a sense of weight, line, gravity, and importance to the picture plane. And finally, the surface of the drawing is active, suggesting the artist's process and decision-making. Now it's your turn to try. Make sure you give yourself focused time to do this drawing. Thank you for watching our drawing videos on citing, measuring, and mapping.
All right, so we are going to be working on a drawing similar to that in class, at our next class. But one difference is that we will be adding value to our drawing. We are going to add shading and value using charcoal. Before we come into class and work on this drawing, however, I would really like for you to work on a study so you get the practice of using a citing stick and how it feels. So what I would like for you to do is set up a still life with at least 5 objects. Try to use mostly simple geometric shapes like cubes, spheres, cylinders. If you have them, you can use cones and pyramids. Just use regular objects that you can find around the house. You're going to use find a tool that you can use for your citing stick. You can use a pencil. Now make sure it's a nice long pencil. If it's a very short little pencil that you've sharpened a lot, it's not going to be long enough to be used as a citing stick. So use a nice long pencil, or you can use something like a chopstick, or if you can find a piece of a dowel. And what I want you to do is to make this drawing using graphite in your sketchbook and fill up the entire page. That's going to be your composition, is the page of your sketchbook. So you should set up something kind of like this. Give yourself some space. hold it out, the sighting stick out straight in front of you, and work on the drawing, and just kind of play around with it. And I want you to notice a few things as you're holding the stick out and looking at your objects. First, we can start looking at some of the angles. The perpendicular or the 90-degree angles, they're the easiest ones to find. Basically, these rectangular boxes and cubes are going to have straight up and down 90-degree angles on their edges. Then you can use your sighting stick to find the angles along the edge of an object. So if you just lay it down and look with your eyes to where it lays right along that edge, now look at the stick. That's the angle you're going to draw on your paper. Try to find that exact same angle and put it on your paper the way you see it. And notice the subtle changes here between the top of that box and this box. There was actually not a whole lot of a difference. Very subtle change. They look very different until you hold your sighting stick up. Now, look again. How sharp are these angles? Are they even 45 degrees? Or maybe some of them a little bit sharper than you might have expected? I think that happens a lot, is that our mind is telling us what we think we see, but then our eyes, and using a sighting stick to help determine exactly what is actually there, will help make your drawing much more accurate. Then you're going to use a sighting stick to compare the objects for sizes and placement. So we're not actually using it as a measuring tool. We don't need a ruler to measure anything. We're just making comparisons. So use your stick to find the height of one object. In this case, I found the height of this large ball. What you're going to do is put the top of the stick level with the top of your object, and then just place your thumb at the bottom of the stick level with the bottom of the object. That's basically the height of one object that you're going to start comparing with. Now, without moving your thumb, just bring the stick over to another object. How do they compare? Notice that in this case, that can, the white can, is probably about 2/3 the height of that ball, or at least this part of the can, and then we're going to have to add more height for the top of the can. And then look at another object in the same way. I still haven't moved my thumb. And notice that this ball looks much smaller than a basketball when you're just looking at them. But if you start comparing with the stick, you might notice that this small ball is actually only half the size of the large ball. So that's how you're going to draw it on your page. And then some things might surprise you, like this box looks like it's much taller than the ball, but when you compare it with the sighting stick, it's only just that little bit more taller. So for this exercise, I want you to just kind of play around with it. It's more about the activity of doing this exercise, playing around, working with it, getting familiar with using a sighting stick. So try to have a little bit of playfulness to it. Remember that in this case, I do want to see a completed drawing, but the main focus of this is really about the activity itself. And then we'll come together in class and we'll work on it some more. I'll see you next class.